Before the evening began, Julian Cross had told himself it would be another performance, another carefully orchestrated parade of wealth disguised as charity. The gallery gleamed beneath chandeliers the size of planets, their crystal rays scattering light like broken stars. Waiters in black silk carried trays of champagne, and laughter rose like artificial perfume from people who had long forgotten how to mean what they said. Julian stood at the center of it all, immaculate in his tailored black suit, every movement precise, his smile practiced to perfection. Nothing in his posture betrayed the fact that he found these gatherings hollow. To the world, he was the ideal host, the self-made billionaire whose fortune had built the very walls surrounding them. His attention drifted between conversations until it settled on a single painting displayed near the grand staircase. A portrait of a young woman with a wistful gaze, restored so delicately that it seemed to breathe. He had seen countless works of art, but this one was different. It felt alive, as though the soul within it had been coaxed back from centuries of silence. Next to the canvas stood the restorer, a woman he did not recognize at first glance. She was not dressed to impress. Her simple navy dress and quiet posture set her apart from the jeweled crowd. She looked as though she didn't belong, and yet, somehow, she belonged more than anyone else in the room. Curiosity drew him toward her before he could question his impulse. "You must be Miss Bennet," he said, his voice smooth, his expression polite. "Your restoration work has been the talk of the evening." She turned, startled, her eyes meeting his. They were soft brown, clear and unguarded, a rare thing in a world built on masks. "Oh," she breathed, her voice small but sincere. "I didn't think anyone would notice. Most people only care about the price tag." Her honesty disarmed him. Julian found himself studying the faint smudge of paint still clinging to her wrist, the nervous way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You brought the piece back to life," he said quietly. "That takes more than skill. It takes heart." She smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "Art has its own heartbeat," she replied. "I just help it remember." For reasons he couldn't explain, her words lingered in him, echoing in the hollow places he rarely acknowledged. Around them, cameras flashed, glasses clinked, and meaningless compliments filled the air. But for a moment, it felt as though the rest of the world had gone silent. Then her face changed. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hand reached out, gripping the edge of the display table. "Miss Bennet?" Julian asked, stepping closer. Her lips moved, forming words he couldn't hear. Her knees buckled before anyone else noticed. Instinct overrode thought. He caught her just as her body went limp, her weight folding into his arms. Gasps rippled through the crowd, a wave of murmurs rising above the music. The crystal glass in his other hand slipped, shattering against the marble floor. "Someone call an ambulance," he barked, but his voice cracked with something unfamiliar. Fear. He looked down at her pale face, her lashes resting like shadows against her skin. Her pulse fluttered weakly against his fingers, fragile as bird wings. The gala lights blurred around them, all gold and motion and meaningless chatter. For the first time in his meticulously controlled life, Julian Cross felt his composure vanish. Money could command silence, build empires, end wars. But in that moment, holding the unconscious woman who had brought a painting back to life, he realized it could not stop the panic flooding his chest. Her head rested against his shoulder, and something inside him shifted. Quiet, but absolute. The man who had built his world on precision and profit felt the trembling truth of a stranger's heartbeat and understood, with startling clarity, that this fragile life in his arms was the only thing that truly mattered. The chandelier light shimmered across her face as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. The guests parted, watching the powerful man they all feared kneel helplessly on the marble floor, whispering her name like a prayer he didn't know he remembered how to say. The sterile light of the hospital corridor hummed above Julian Cross like an accusation as he stood motionless beside the emergency room doors, his $1,000 shoes now scuffed from pacing for over an hour. The scent of antiseptic burned his senses, and for the first time in years he felt powerless, stripped of the control that had defined every decision of his life. Behind the double doors, doctors moved like shadows, and machines sang their strange mechanical lullabies. He had heard those sounds before, in the years when he had lost his sister to a rare illness, but tonight they sounded different, crueler, because this time, the life at risk was one he had only just begun to understand. Clara Bennett. The woman who had collapsed in his arms hours ago was no longer a stranger. Her name had rooted itself in his thoughts, refusing to fade. He could still feel the faint tremor of her pulse against his fingertips and the haunting softness of her voice. Before she fell, silence pressed in on him like the weight of an ocean until the doors finally opened. A doctor stepped out, clipboard in hand, her expression composed, but tired. She is stable for now, exhaustion and dehydration mostly, but there are underlying issues that concern us, the doctor said quietly. She will need observation and follow-up care. Julian's chest tightened with relief, followed immediately by something sharper, concern that clawed at the edges of his restraint. "May I see her?" he asked, his voice a shade rougher than intended. When he entered the room, the air changed. The steady beep of a heart monitor filled the space. Clara lay pale against the white sheets. Her hair spilled across the pillow like dark silk. Her eyes fluttered open at the sound of his footsteps. Confusion flickered there, followed by embarrassment, as if she had committed some unforgivable social mistake. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to ruin your evening. I shouldn't even be here." Julian stepped closer, lowering his voice so it would not break whatever fragile dignity she was clinging to. "You didn't ruin anything, Miss Bennett. You scared me, that's all. I'll have my driver take you home once the doctor clears you." She shook her head weakly. "No, I can't afford any of this. Not the hospital, not the ride. I'll be fine. Really, please, just forget this happened. Forget this happened." The words cut deeper than he expected. How easily she assumed she was disposable. A temporary inconvenience. He had spent years surrounded by people who fought for his attention, but here was a woman desperate to vanish from it. "I don't forget people who collapse in my arms," he said quietly, trying to keep his tone light, but his voice trembled with something else, something dangerously close to care. He reached for the clipboard at the end of her bed, scanning it quickly before she could stop him. The medical terms hit him like blows: iron deficiency, autoimmune warning signs, severe anemia, and at the bottom of the chart, an unfinished note referring her to a specialist. "You've been sick for a while, haven't you?" he asked softly. Her silence was answer enough. Her gaze shifted toward the window where the city lights shimmered like distant stars. "I'm fine," she said again, but her voice lacked conviction. Fine people don't faint at galas or work 2 jobs while living on instant coffee and paint fumes, he thought. The doctor returned, interrupting the tension. "She needs rest and proper meals, and she cannot return to work for at least a week." Julian nodded. All read. "I calculating solutions without asking permission." He gave the nurse his black credit card handle, the expenses under Cross Foundation emergency aid. He felt something cold settle inside him. She was gone without a word. He left the hospital and instructed his driver to find her address within the hour. When he finally stood outside her apartment building, he saw how far her world was from his. The structure leaned with age, the bricks cracked, the steps uneven. Her mailbox was covered in paint smudges, her name written faintly on a paper label. He climbed the stairs and heard faint coughing behind the thin door. He knocked gently. Her voice came out weak. "Who is it?" "It's Julian Cross," he said. The silence that followed felt endless. Then the door opened. She stood there, pale in the soft light, wrapped in an oversized sweater, brushes and canvases scattered behind her. "I told you not to come," she said. "You also told me you were fine," he answered. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. He stepped inside the apartment. It smelled faintly of turpentine and wilted flowers. Unfinished paintings leaned against the walls, each filled with a strange brightness that didn't exist in her life. She was painting light. He realized, as if trying to hold on to it. "You've been skipping treatments," he said quietly. She froze. "How do you know?" "Because I checked your file." She turned toward him, anger flashing through exhaustion. "You had no right to do that. You think because you have money, you can invade my life." He took a step closer, not with authority, but with sincerity. "No, I did it because I don't want to lose you." Her breath caught for a moment, but her expression hardened again. "You don't even know me. Maybe not yet, but I will," he said softly. Before she could respond, her knees buckled again. He caught her just in time, his heart pounding, her pulse weak, her skin ice cold, as he lifted her into his arms. The truth hit him like thunder. She didn't have time. He couldn't stand by and watch her fade. He would do whatever it took to save her, even if it meant breaking every rule he had built his empire upon. Outside, thunder rolled over the city as if warning him that love once awakened would not let him rest until it demanded everything he had. The rain came without warning. It fell hard and fast, turning the city into a blur of silver and shadow. Julian stood at the window of his penthouse, his hands gripping the edge of the marble counter as lightning flashed across the skyline. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, but all he could think about was the fragile woman asleep in his guest room. Clara had collapsed again 2 nights ago, and he had refused to take her back to that small apartment. She had fought him at first, her voice trembling with pride, but he had seen the fear behind her eyes. Now she slept under his roof, her breathing shallow but steady, and he couldn't look away from her. He had called in his private physician who confirmed what Julian already knew. Her condition was worsening fast. Her heart was struggling every beat, a quiet rebellion against time. She needed advanced treatment, something beyond ordinary medicine, and only his company had the technology that could save her. But using it meant breaking rules, meant exposure and betrayal from his own board members. A soft sound broke his thoughts. Clara stood at the doorway, her hair loose, her skin pale, but her eyes stubborn as ever. "You can't keep me here," she said quietly, her voice barely rising over the rain. "You have no right to decide where I belong." He turned slowly, his face unreadable. "You fainted twice in 3 days. If I hadn't been there, you could have died." She met his gaze without flinching. Maybe that would have been easier than this being trapped between life and fear. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," he said sharply, more than he intended. She took a step back, the air thick between them. "I saw the hospital papers," she continued, her tone low. "You paid for everything, and I found out who you are. The man who owns half the skyline. Why would someone like you care about someone like me?" He hesitated, then spoke. "Because someone I loved died from the same illness, and I couldn't save her. This time, I won't stand by and watch it happen again." Clara's eyes softened, then filled with tears. She turned away, staring out at the storm outside. "You think you can buy redemption with me? That's not what this is," he whispered, but his voice faltered. He didn't know what it was anymore. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain against glass. She moved toward the elevator, her legs trembling, but her resolve steady. "I'm leaving tonight," she said. He followed her, his pulse quickening. "Where will you go? You can barely walk." She stopped near the door, her shoulders shaking. "I'll find my way. I always have." Then it happened. Her vision blurred, the world tilted, and before he could reach her, she fell again, this time hitting the cold floor with a faint sound. He caught her just before her head struck the marble, her body weightless in his arms. He shouted her name once, twice, but she didn't respond. Her lips pale, her skin cold. Lightning flared again across the city. His heart pounded louder than the thunder. He lifted her, carried her to the car, ignoring the rain that soaked his suit. The driver stared wide-eyed. "Sir, should I call the hospital?" "No," he snapped. "Drive to the private clinic. Now hurry." As they sped through the storm, he looked down at her face, and a strange calm came over him. It wasn't fear anymore. It was determination, the kind that came from somewhere beyond logic. He had spent his whole life mastering control, but this was something else, something that demanded faith. He brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, whispering, "Stay with me, Clara, please, stay with me." By the time they reached the clinic, she stirred faintly, her eyes fluttering open, her voice weak. "Why are you doing this? Why can't you just let me go?" "Because I can't," he said simply. The doctors rushed her inside and he stood outside the door, drenched, trembling for the first time in years. The man who could buy anything found himself begging the universe for one thing that money could not promise. He didn't care about the cost, the scandal, or the danger that would come from defying his own empire. He would break every rule of his life to keep hers. As the storm raged beyond the glass, Julian realized something that made his chest tighten. It wasn't guilt driving him anymore. It was love, raw and desperate, the kind that leaves no way back. And somewhere deep inside him, he knew that love was about to cost him everything. The ocean whispered below the cliffs like a secret it refused to keep. Julian stood on the balcony of his coastal estate, watching the morning fog drift through the air. The night at the clinic had left him shaken, but Clara was stable now, asleep in the guest room behind him. He had moved her there himself, carrying her through the storm. She didn't know where she was yet, and part of him feared her reaction when she woke. He had acted without asking, without permission, but the thought of losing her again had been unbearable. He turned when he heard a faint sound. The door creaked open and Clara stepped out, wearing a soft gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, her eyes confused and wary. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice fragile. "You're safe," he said. "This is my home." She stared at him, disbelief flickering across her face. "You brought me here. Why?" "Because you needed rest," he answered simply, "and I needed to make sure you stayed alive." She moved closer to the window, gazing out at the endless horizon, the sea reflected in her eyes, like liquid glass. "I didn't ask for this," she said softly, her tone full of exhaustion. "I can't live like a prisoner. I won't." She turned back to him, her expression fierce. "I've lived my whole life fighting for control over something I can't fix, my body, my future. I won. To let you take away what little choice I have left." He walked toward her, each step, careful. "You have more strength than you realize, but you're burning it away, trying to pretend you don't need anyone." She looked away, tears glimmering. "I don't want anyone to pity me." "Then don't ask for pity," he said, his voice low and intense. "Ask for help. I have resources, doctors, treatments that can change everything." She shook her head. "No one can change what's coming." "You can't buy time, Julian. Maybe I can buy a chance," he replied. The tension between them hung heavy until the sound of the ocean filled the silence again. He reached into his jacket and placed a folder on the table. "Project Elysium," he said. "It's an experimental program from my company. It's risky, but it could work. It's already being tested." She stared at the folder as if it might explode. "What are you saying, that you want to use me as one of your projects?" His jaw tightened. "No, I want to give you hope." She opened the folder slowly, her eyes scanning the pages, her face paling. "This file has my name on it." Her voice shook. "What is this? How long have you known about me?" He froze, realizing too late that she had found the part of the report that listed her medical data and test results gathered months before they ever met. Clara looked up, her expression a mix of fear and betrayal. "You knew about me before that night, didn't you? This wasn't an accident. You were watching me." She stepped back, her hands trembling. "You invited me to that gala because of this, because I was part of your experiment." "No," he said quickly. "It wasn't like that. I swear I didn't even know you were the same patient until later." "You expect me to believe that?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You think you can just play God? Decide who lives, who gets saved?" She pushed the folder against his chest and the papers scattered across the floor. He took a step toward her, but she recoiled, her voice rising. "I'm not your redemption story, Julian Crow." Before he could answer, thunder rumbled over the sea, the storm outside building again, as if echoing the chaos between them. She turned and ran down the hallway. He followed, calling her name, but she was faster, driven by anger and heartbreak. She reached the front door, flinging it open, rain and wind crashing in around her. "Clara, stop, please listen to me," he shouted, but she shook her head. "I can't do this," she cried, her voice swallowed by the storm. "You don't love me, you love your guilt." Then she was gone, the door slamming shut behind her, leaving him standing in the echo of her absence, the rain soaking the papers on the floor. One page stuck to his shoe, the ink bleeding into nothing. He picked it up, the line blurring before his eyes. Patient prognosis, critical without immediate intervention. He sank to his knees, the storm outside roaring like punishment. He had tried to save her with science and logic, but in the process he had lost the only thing that made him feel alive. And now, as the lightning split the sky, he realized he might not get another chance to tell her the truth, that he didn't want to save her out of guilt. He wanted to save her because somewhere between her heartbeat and her courage, he had found the one thing he'd never known: how to fight for love. The city never slept, but that night it seemed to hold its breath. Rain washed the streets clean of color and sound, while Julian drove through the darkness, chasing the faint trace of where Clara might have gone. His phone buzzed again, his security chief reporting no sign of her anywhere. She had vanished into the storm, as if the world itself had swallowed her. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, headlights cutting through mist, his mind replaying every word she had shouted. "You don't love me. You love your guilt." The words burned deeper than he wanted to admit. He could handle public shame, financial loss, even betrayal, but not this. Not the silence that followed her leaving. Every minute without her felt heavier than any failure he had faced. The city lights blurred. As memories collided with the sound of her voice, he had crossed every line to protect her and still lost her. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had tried to fix her pain to erase his own. Hours later, he stopped in front of her apartment building. The hallway smelled of damp paint and loneliness. He knocked once, then again. Nothing. When he finally pushed the door open, it creaked. She wasn't there. Only her half-finished paintings leaned against the walls, their colors smeared and restless. One canvas sat in the center of the room, a stormy sea beneath a single fragile figure standing against the wind. He stared at it for a long moment, his throat tight. He noticed the table scattered with unopened envelopes, hospital bills, rejection letters, prescriptions. She had been drowning long before he stepped into her life. He whispered her name into the empty air, but only silence answered. Then something caught his eye. A small notebook, half hidden under a pile of brushes. He opened it and froze. The pages were filled with sketches of his face, drawn in hurried strokes between notes about light and heart rhythm. She had written fragments of thoughts, small, fragile things. Maybe tomorrow, I'll tell him. Maybe he'll see the real me. Maybe I'll stop running. He pressed the book to his chest and for the first time in years felt tears break through his composure. He turned and left the apartment, knowing where he had to go. The hospital. When he arrived, the nurses recognized him immediately. Mr. Cross, she was brought in earlier tonight, collapsed in her studio. She's in surgery now. His vision blurred for a moment. He hadn't even realized he had started running until he reached the operating room window through the glass. He saw doctors moving quickly, machines blinking, the rhythm of her heartbeat faint and uneven. He stood there frozen, memories flooding in the night. His sister had died, the helplessness that had defined him. Since he was young, he had sworn never again to feel that kind of loss. Yet here he was, watching another person he cared for slip beyond his reach. A soft voice behind him made him turn. Dr. Haldeman, his chief researcher, stood there pale and grim. "We're out of options. The damage is severe, but there is one possibility. Your therapy, the Elysium prototype. It's untested, and the board will never approve it. If it fails, you'll lose everything." Julian didn't hesitate. "Do it," he said, his voice steady. "I don't care about the board or my name. Save her, use it now." Haldeman looked at him as if seeing the man beneath the legend for the first time. "You understand, if she dies under this treatment, they'll destroy you." "Yes," Julian said quietly. "But if she dies without it, I'll never forgive myself." As they prepared the procedure, he watched through the glass, each second stretching into eternity. His hand pressed against the cold window, the rhythm of the monitor slowing until it almost stopped. The surgeon's movements quickened, and he heard one of them shout, "Clear." The shock echoed through the corridor. Her body arched, then fell. Still, he could no longer breathe. After what felt like forever, a faint beep returned, a single fragile heartbeat. He closed his eyes, letting the air rush back into his lungs, relief and terror mixing, until he could no longer tell the difference. But when the doors finally opened, the doctor's expression was unreadable. "We've stabilized her, but she isn't waking yet. Her body is fighting hard. We won't know until morning if she'll survive." Julian sank into the chair outside the room, his hands trembling. For years, he had built walls of logic and control. Now all of it meant nothing. He looked through the glass at her pale face, surrounded by wires and light, and whispered words he had never said to anyone. "Please wake up, Clara. Please come back to me." As dawn crept through the hospital windows too, earning the sky a faint gold, he realized the storm outside had passed, but the one inside him had just begun, because he knew when she opened her eyes, everything would change forever. Morning came slow and uncertain. The light slipped through the hospital blinds, touching Clara's face with a softness that didn't belong in a place built for pain. Machines hummed beside her bed, keeping rhythm with a heartbeat that refused to give up. Julian sat slumped in a chair. His suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. He hadn't slept in 2 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moment her heart stopped, the silence that followed, and the flash of her body jerking under the defibrillator. Now he sat motionless, waiting for the smallest sign that she was still somewhere behind those closed eyes. Dr. Haldeman entered quietly, his expression heavy. She survived the night, but we're not out of danger yet. Her body is weak and there are complications. The treatment worked, but the damage is deep. It's possible she might not wake for days or even weeks. Julian nodded numbly, the words sliding over him without meaning. He couldn't lose her. Not now. Not when he had given up everything to save her. As the doctor left, he reached for her hand. It was warm, faintly trembling, her fingers small against his. He whispered her name over and over, until it became a prayer. Clara, please come back. I can't fix this world without you. Hours passed. People moved in and out, nurses adjusting wires, monitors, blinking. He barely noticed any of it until the door opened again and a tall man stepped inside, wearing an expensive coat and an expression that carried venom. Victor Hale, Julian's former business partner. So it's true, Victor said. You actually did it. You used the experimental treatment on her without approval. Julian's jaw tightened. What are you doing here? Victor smirked. The board sent me. They know what you did, and they want answers. You've crossed every line and destroyed the company's credibility. You think I care about your company? Julian snapped, his voice cold. I care about her. Victor's eyes narrowed. Her? Who is she? To you, some poor artist you dragged into your guilt trip for your sister's death. This is madness. Julian rose to his feet, his voice low but dangerous. Get out before I forget what's left of my restraint. Victor stepped closer. I warned you years ago not to let emotion guide you. Now look at you risking billions for one dying girl. He leaned in, whispering so quietly only Julian could hear it. If she dies, you'll go down with her. Julian's hand clenched, but before he could speak, a faint sound broke through Clara's lips. A fragile whisper. Both men froze. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion flickering across her face. Julian turned instantly, his voice soft. Clara, it's me. You're safe now. She blinked slowly, her gaze drifting between the two men. Where am I? What happened? You fainted again, but you're alive. You're going to be fine, he said. She frowned, her voice weak. How long have I been here? 3 days, he answered, relief washing over him. Then her attention shifted to Victor, who stared at her like she was a problem to solve. Who is he? She asked quietly. Victor straightened with false charm. I'm the man trying to clean up the mess your hero created. Clara's eyes darkened. She turned toward Julian. What does he mean? Julian hesitated for a moment, then told her the truth. The procedure we used to save you, it wasn't approved. The board will use it against us. I might lose everything. She stared at him, stunned. You risked your entire life for me. Why? Because you're worth more than everything I've built, he said simply. Victor laughed softly. How noble, he said. But the law won't see it that way. The board already froze your accounts and leaked the story by morning. Every news outlet will call you reckless. She'll see who you really are. Clara's face went pale. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her chest. You shouldn't have done it, she whispered. Now they'll destroy you. Julian reached out his hand, steady. Don't care. Let them take everything as long as you live. She looked into his eyes, searching for deception, but found none. The storm in her expression softened, though her heart still trembled with guilt. Outside the hospital, cameras began gathering, reporters shouting questions through the rain. The scandal had begun before the sun had even risen. Victor turned to leave, his voice sharp. Enjoy your moment of heroism, Cross, because by the end of the day, you'll lose not just your fortune, but her too. People like her don't survive men like you. As he disappeared down the hallway, Julian returned his gaze to Clara. She was breathing faster, her eyes glistening. I'm not leaving you, he said, but she shook her head weakly. You might have saved my life, but I won't let you destroy yours for me. Her voice cracked with emotion as she whispered the words that cut him deeper than any betrayal. Please let me go before they take you down with me. He reached for her hand again, but this time she turned away. tears slipping silently down her cheeks, and as the reporters' voices grew louder outside the glass wall, Julian realized he was no longer fighting a disease or a corporation, he was fighting fate itself. And fate was a ruthless enemy. The hospital walls felt like they were closing in on him. News cameras swarmed outside the entrance, reporters shouting his name as if it were a crime. Julian Cross, billionaire, rule breaker, savior, or sinner. The headlines were already spreading faster than the truth. His company's stock was crashing. Investors pulling out contracts suspended overnight. Everything he had built over decades was falling apart, but none of it mattered because Clara was gone. She had disappeared before dawn, leaving only a handwritten note on the hospital bed. "Thank you for saving my life, but I can't let you lose yours because of me. Please don't look for me." Julian stared at the note for a long time, the paper trembling in his hand, the ink smudged by tears she had tried to protect him, even as her body was still healing. He could barely breathe. She was out there somewhere fragile and alone while the city turned against him. Security cameras caught her, leaving the hospital at sunrise, wearing a borrowed coat and moving slowly, her heart still weak. She couldn't have gone far. He called his driver, told him to bring the car. But the moment he stepped into the street, flashbulbs exploded. People screamed questions about the illegal treatment, about the woman, about the betrayal of his company. He pushed through the chaos until he reached the car. "Get me out of here," he ordered, his voice raw as they drove through the city. His mind raced. He knew where she might go, the one place that still felt like hers, the art institute where she had worked, restoring forgotten pieces of beauty. He arrived minutes later. The rain had started again, soft at first, then heavier until it drowned the city in silver sheets. He found the doors locked, but light flickered inside. He pushed through the back entrance and stopped. The sight stole his breath. Clara stood before a canvas painting feverishly, her hand trembling, every stroke desperate and alive. Her hair clung to her face, her eyes hollow but fierce. She didn't notice him at first until the sound of his footsteps echoed across the gallery. She turned, startled fear flashing across her expression. "Julian, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice breaking. He stepped closer, ignoring the wet floor, the storm pounding against the windows. "You left the hospital without treatment. You could die if you keep pushing yourself." She backed away, shaking her head. "I told you to stay away. You've lost everything because of me. Your company, your name, your world. I won't let you lose more." He took another step, his voice low. "I didn't lose anything worth keeping without you. None of it means anything." She stared at him, her hands trembling on the brush. "You can't fix me, Julian. I'm not your unfinished project. I'm not a painting you can restore." He stopped inches from her, his eyes dark with emotion. "You're not my project. You're my reason. I used to believe control was strength, but the night you fainted in my arms, I realized the truth. I've spent my life collecting things that could never love me back. But you made me feel alive again." The silence between them deepened, the storm outside roaring like applause or warning. She lowered her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I can't give you the future you deserve. I'm broken and fading every day. Then let me fade with you," he said gently. "I'd rather lose everything than live without meaning." Her breath caught her chest rising unevenly. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to stop running, but fear clung to her like a shadow. Before she could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Victor Hale appeared, flanked by 2 security officers, his expression smug. "I told you it would end like this," he said to Julian. "You're trespassing. This property belongs to the Cross Foundation now, and you're officially removed from your position." Clara's face went pale. Victor smiled at her. "So this is the woman who ruined you. Impressive but foolish. Do you even know what he sacrificed for you?" She stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" He leaned closer. "Julian sold every remaining share of his company to fund the cure that saved your life. He has nothing left. No home, no empire, just you." Her eyes widened, shock and pain colliding. She turned to Julian. "Is it true?" He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her everything. She took a step toward him, but before she could reach him, her vision blurred, her knees buckled. He caught her just in time, her pulse faltering, her breathing shallow. The doctors had warned that her heart couldn't handle stress. This was it, the breaking point. "Call an ambulance," Julian shouted. But Victor hesitated, smirking almost cruelly. "I warned you. Cross, some things aren't meant to be saved." Julian's voice broke into a roar. "Get out of my sight or I swear you'll regret it." The security guards backed away, frightened by the fury in his eyes. As rain shattered against the glass, Julian lifted Clara in his arms, her face pale, her heartbeat barely there. He ran through the empty streets toward the clinic. His clothes soaked his breath. Ragged every step, an act of defiance against the storm, he whispered against her ear, "Stay with me, Clara, please stay." The sound of sirens grew closer, but her body felt too light, too still. When he looked down, her lips moved faintly. She whispered something he could barely hear. "You gave everything away for me." "Why?" "Because you are everything," he said. And as the ambulance lights flashed red and white across their faces, Julian realized that love had finally taken everything from him except the only thing that mattered, the will to keep her alive, no matter the cost. The night blurred into sirens, rain, and flashing red lights. Julian rode in the ambulance, gripping Clara's hand, as if letting go would mean losing her forever. The paramedics moved fast, voices calm but urgent. The heart monitor screamed in uneven patterns, every sound slicing through him. She was pale, her breath shallow, her eyelids fluttering between life and darkness. He whispered her name over and over, promising her she would make it, promising her that love was stronger than whatever was pulling her away. When they reached the hospital, doors swung open and doctors rushed her inside. Julian tried to follow, but they blocked him. "Stay here, sir. We need space," they said. His voice cracked. "Please save her. I'll give you anything." They didn't answer. They had already disappeared behind the double doors, leaving him alone in the corridor, drenched and trembling. Minutes felt like hours. He paced until his legs ached. Reporters had followed him even here. Cameras flashing through the glass doors, their voices like knives. Questions about the scandal, the illegal treatment, the money he lost, but all of that sounded distant. None of it mattered. He had traded everything for one heartbeat, and now that heartbeat, As fading, Dr. Haldeman finally appeared, his face grave. "We can stabilize her, but the damage to her heart is severe. The last treatment extended her time, not cured. We can try another dose, but it's riskier this time. It could either save her or stop her heart completely." Julian didn't hesitate. "Do it," he said without thinking. The doctor stared at him. "This could kill her. I'd rather die trying than lose her now," he said quietly, his voice steady. "Do it." The doctor nodded grimly and disappeared into the operating room. The doors shut again, sealing Julian on the other side. He sank to the floor, his back against the wall, the sound of rain on the hospital windows filling the silence. He thought about the first night he saw her, the way she smiled shyly under the chandelier, the moment she fainted in his arms, and how the world had changed since then. He had been a man of control, of precision. Now he was a man begging for a miracle. Time twisted. He didn't know how long he sat there until the door finally opened again. Dr. Haldeman's eyes were tired, but there was something else there too, something like disbelief. "She's alive," he said softly. "The treatment worked. Her heart is responding." Julian froze for a second as if he hadn't heard. Then he rose, his body shaking. "Where is she?" he asked. The doctor led him down the hallway to a quiet recovery room. Clara lay there, her skin warm, her breathing steady for the first time in days. Tubes and monitors still surrounded her, but life had returned to her face. He stood by her bedside, unable to move, afraid she might vanish if he blinked. She stirred slowly, her eyes opening to meet his. She looked confused, then relieved. "You look terrible," she whispered, her voice faint. He laughed, a sound that broke and rebuilt him all at once. "You scared me more than anyone ever has," she smiled weakly. "You gave away everything for me. I saw it on the news. They called you a fallen empire." "I didn't fall," he said softly. "I let go of things that never mattered." She touched his hand, her fingers trembling. "You shouldn't have done that. You deserved to have." "See it all?" He shook his head. "I already do." Their silence was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Victor Hale stood there again, his face pale with fury. "You really did it," he said quietly. "You ruined the company and yourself for her. The board is filing charges against you. You're finished." Julian stepped in front of Clara, his voice low and cold. "If they want a villain, I'll give them one. but I'm not leaving her. Victor's lip curled. This isn't love. It's obsession. She's your destruction. Julian met his gaze unflinching. Maybe she is, but she's also my redemption now. Get out before I lose what's left of my patience. Victor hesitated, his confidence faltering at the look in Julian's eyes before he turned and left the room, slamming the door behind him. The air fell quiet again. The storm outside had calmed, replaced by the low hum of machines. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You've lost everything, she whispered. No, he said softly. I lost everything long before you came into my life. I just didn't realize it then. Now I have something real. Her tears spilled over as she whispered, I don't know how to be with someone who would give up the world for me. He smiled faintly, then learn how. Because I'm not letting go. She closed her eyes, her hand still in his, and for the first time in months, peace settled between them. Outside the hospital, the first light of dawn broke through the clouds, pale and gold and fragile. Julian looked out the window, realizing that his empire no longer stood on glass towers and contracts, but on the heartbeat of the woman who had fainted into his arms and changed everything forever. The sun rose over the city, like it was trying to erase every trace of the storm. The hospital smelled of disinfectant and beginnings outside the window. The light caught on the glass and painted everything in gold. Julian watched it from the chair beside Clara's bed, his hand wrapped gently around H. Ears. He hadn't slept the night before. The fear of losing her still sat in his chest like a weight. But she was breathing softly now, her pulse strong and steady. She was alive, and that was all he needed. A nurse entered quietly with a folder in her hand. Dr. Haldeman asked me to give you this, she said. Julian took it slowly inside, was a single sheet stamped with the company's seal. It was an official notice of termination, his name erased from the empire he had built from nothing. He read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table beside her. He didn't care anymore. His life had already changed into something money could never measure. When Clara woke, her eyes searched for him and found his. She smiled faintly. How long have I been asleep? 2 days, he said softly. Long enough for the world to decide. I'm either insane or in love. Maybe both. She laughed quietly, then stopped when she saw the paper beside her. What is that? My freedom, he said, smiling faintly. They took the company, but I gave them a cure. She frowned, confused. What do you mean? He leaned closer. Every patent, every formula, everything related to the treatment that saved you. I signed it over to public use. I wanted it to belong to the people who need it, not to those who sell hope like a product. Her eyes widened in disbelief. You gave it all away. That was your entire fortune, your legacy. He nodded slowly. My legacy was never the money. It was what I did with it. Tears filled her eyes. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said quietly. Because what's the point of saving a life if you don't save what's left of your soul? The room fell silent for a long time. Then she whispered, I don't know how to thank you. You already did when you opened your eyes. Weeks passed and the world changed faster than either of them expected. News broke that the new therapy was saving hundreds across the country. People wrote his name in headlines, but this time not as a scandal, as a miracle. Yet Julian refused interviews. He wanted no spotlight. He wanted peace. Months later, Clara stood in a small art cafe by the sea, the same one where she had dreamed of hosting her own exhibit. Her health was better, her skin glowing with life. She hung her newest painting on the wall, a piece titled The Moment Between Heartbeats. It showed 2 figures standing in the rain, one holding the other, as light broke through the clouds. When she stepped back, someone behind her said softly, I remember that night. She turned and saw him standing in the doorway, dressed simply, his hair longer, the sharpness in his face replaced by calm. She froze for a moment, then smiled. I thought you vanished. He shrugged. I tried, but I kept hearing your voice in the waves. She moved closer, her voice trembling. I never got to ask what happened after they took everything. He smiled a real smile for the first time in years. I started painting, turns out, when you stop chasing the world. It finally lets you breathe. She reached out, touching his hand gently. You gave the world so much. It's time you let it give you something back. He tilted his head. What could it give me that I don't already have? She smiled softly. Me, if you still want me. He didn't speak. Instead, he pulled her into his arms. The world outside faded, the sea roared, and the gulls cried overhead. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart that had once almost stopped for her. When they finally stepped outside, the wind carried salt and sunlight through the air. The ocean shimmered, endless and free. She looked up at him and said softly, I used to think love was a weakness. Now I know it's the only thing strong enough to heal a broken heart. He took her hand in his and whispered, Then let's keep healing together. As they walked along the shore, the tide rose around their feet, and the waves erased their footprints behind them, leaving nothing but the sound of the sea and two people who had learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. The horizon glowed ahead, and in that light, Julian Cross finally understood the meaning of forever.